we're good to start here. Thank
Yep.
you all for joining me today. I appreciate it. So we're just going to go with the classic icebreaker. So the theme is obviously HuSecCon, Alien, Space City. Hairstyle is considered space buns, and I have cowboy hats on top of each, which means I am a space cowboy. Guess a space cowgirl, but welcome to my talk, which is going to be IT meets OT. Welcome to the land of big machines and bigger problems. So this was initially a collaboration with a coworker of mine, and this was working earlier. Oh wait, okay, yes, whoopsies. Okay, this was initially a collaboration with my colleague Elin, who is right here. This is me at a booth in my senior year of my cybersecurity bachelor's, terrified out of my mind, only ever knowing what IT was, learning in this instant what OT was. So this is a really valuable talk for me, at least, because I had only known IT my whole life, and I thought cybersecurity was kind of lame when I was only learning about IT. So discovering OT was amazing for me, and that gentleman actually did this presentation with me at OTSecCon, which is getting gobbled up by the little alien spaceship because this was a last-minute change. Now, I'm going to introduce myself, which is Jamie Lean. I'm currently an OT Community Program Coordinator at Dragos, which basically means that I just give away our stuff for free at Dragos, such as the Dragos platform. But it also means that I work with super underrepresented utilities, water, electric, oil, natural, and gas. I see kind of the gap that they have, at least in their OT environments. And so that's my qualification. I will have been at Dragos for 1 year this November, November 1st. I have my bachelor's in IT management and cybersecurity. This gentleman is not here, so he doesn't matter. And so, I'm kidding. What you can expect from this is just gonna be very IT-OT collaboration. I mean, this talk is typically supposed to be meant for individuals who are on the OT side and the IT side, maybe only ever doing one their whole life and are interested about the other. And so I value that kind of back and forth. When it comes to what this is going to encompass holistically, you're looking at just kind of the buzzwords from each side. What even is this stuff? We're going to be looking at generally the differences between IT and OT, what the average day in the life, what the average worker might look like, barriers and stigmas. Technologies colliding and cyber threats through both lenses are essentially the same thing, but we're just going to go over them in collaboration and try and take that stigma away. I hid little dragons throughout this presentation. If you find them, nothing happens, but I did take the time to hide them and count them out. You're welcome. So, moving forward, what words you may hear today? If we go over the words that you might hear today, there's going to be quite a few of them. First, we're going to start with OT, which is operational technology. We're going to go over ICS, which is industrial control systems. When we talk about the DMZ, it's kind of that buffer between the OT environment and once you hit enterprise, which is going to be your IT environment. Building management systems, systems that control HVAC, water, power. We're going to be looking at flame management systems. That's another variation that we'll be discussing. Systems that are used to burn off explosives. Next is going to be air gapping. Yes, air gapping. Sorry, it's hard for me to see what's on the screen. So when air gapping, so that's no connections to anything. It is very difficult to have a truly air-gapped system. We really don't see that at all, and even people who think they are air-gapped are not. And so when we discuss OT, when we discuss these vocabulary words today, this is kind of what their meaning is behind them. And so when we go into the OT and IT, we know that OT manages a lot of big machines. We're talking oil rigs, we're talking water facilities, manufacturing, nuclear. When we hear IT, we hear the computers inside of those buildings, the emailing services, the web surfing, the video conferencing. So the things that might be going on inside those facilities. But the biggest thing to differentiate is that OT is going to be those big physical buildings, those manufacturing facilities, the water, and IT is still important, it just looks a little bit different. And so that kind of leads me into OT. Now, a lot of people on the OT side are already very familiar with IT. A lot of them probably worked in IT for many years before transitioning to OT, whereas you don't have that same correlation on the IT side. You don't often see people who are working in OT for like 30 years and then going to IT, like you would somebody in IT for 30 years going to OT, which is perfectly fine, but that leads me to the IT and OT discussion of OT knew about you But did you know about OT? Probably not. If you did, that's really cool. I didn't up until 3 years ago. Now, this is a very, very generous version of the Purdue model. Now, when we talk about the Purdue model, we talk about the different levels in the environment floors. So your level 0 through 3 is going to be what we consider your OT environment. Your 3.5 is going to be your DMZ, which is kind of like the middle ground in the connection, that little like purgatory between the IT and OT side. And then once you hit that level 4, you're looking at your IT. When you, no, I'm not. So when you consider your level 4 is going to be your IT environment. So the DMZ is that little special space in between that connects and separates them, which is pretty valuable. And I like to consider it a purgatory. So moving on. So same, but different. Now this is where I go in to discuss how OT and IT are same, but different, which is just fun to say, which is why I made it the title of multiple slides. So we consider OT, again, like I said, I'm just reiterating, oil rigs, electric plants, water facilities, manufacturing facilities. When we talk about IT, we're talking about data center, cloud infrastructure, network operations centers, enterprise resource planning, maybe like your typical SOC as well. Now, when I say OT is the physical aspect, I say that if something goes wrong in OT, you could imagine perhaps on a very extreme end, a pipeline not working, maybe a substation giving off some very dangerous levels of explosions. And when I talk about the IT side, I talk about, oh no, someone got into your IT environment, your mouse isn't going to jump out and get you. Your keyboard is not going to start typing and throwing the keys at you to physically hurt you. You might see your mouse move on your screen, but your keyboard and mouse are not going to physically jump you in your chair and tackle you down. Whereas any type of interaction that's coming in on your OT environment can bridge that physical connection with you, which can lead it to be very dangerous in a lot of cases. So this is where we go to same, my personal favorite. So we talk about same. We're talking about they share the same things. On the IT side and the OT side, your same is going to be you're going to have incident response plans. You're going to have tabletops. You're going to have a chain of command. You're going to have your firewalls, your routers, your switches, your domain controllers. These are words that on both sides of the house, you're going to understand and you're going to see. However, the difference is that when we change, if it's IT or OT, what's inside of those words changes. How you're going to view them, how they work, different. So this is where we go into the different aspects. A tabletop, and it's a response plan. Anything on your OT side is going to look different than on your IT side. You're going to have them, but the way that they fundamentally should be executed is going to be different. And it's just because they have different purposes. So like when we're considering tabletops on IT and OT. On your OT side, we always talk about like the CIA triangle. Availability is extremely critical on the OT side, whereas confidentiality might be the extremely critical aspect of IT. And it's because on IT, you're totally okay doing your Patch Tuesdays to make sure everything goes really good. However, if you have a forced and non-consensual Patch Tuesday that this equipment hasn't seen in like its entire life cycle on the OT side, you might also just have things that stop working forever. Or just stop doing anything. And when those go down, that's a lot of money. In the way that they go down, that can also just cause extreme damage to people or other equipment. That's another thing that's really cool about the OT side. The keyboard and mouse on the IT side might not jump out and get you. Even if you're on the OT side, it might try and get itself. That's a functionality that they could do. So that's why I highlight here that an incident response plan for IT cannot be reliably executed in the same way that it would be for your OT environment. And that's just because, again, they have their fundamentals. But that doesn't mean that each is not valuable in its own way. And that's what I'm really trying to get across here, is that when we talk about these things, it is extremely important to have these on both sides of the house. I'm trying to get across that although IT and OT have their extensive differences and that they should be carefully considered and executed in different ways, they are same in a lot of ways. They are both extremely valuable. They have very important roles to whatever enterprise they're attached to. Like any environment, if we were talking about, let's just say a big company like BP, their OT environment is valuable, but their IT is also extremely valuable. Like these people are making a lot of money, their jobs are very important. There's not one taking away from the other, but it's important that we need to be able to collaborate and understand that, for example, we both have these. but understand why they're different and not try and fight each other on why one is better than the other. Because they're not supposed to be combined. They're supposed to be two halves making a whole in their respective areas. So moving on from that, I think. Very cool. We're going to talk about the people that you typically see. IT and OT, again, we're going over the respective differences. You're going to run into different personality types. As Elin likes to say, is that normally on the IT side, you'll run into one dude who's been doing it for 50 years and will badmouth you the whole day, but at the end of the day, you two will go grab a beer. And that's just because the job is rough, it's tough. Nobody's really giving you probably the same time of day that they might give their IT folks. And it's also, it brings in different personality types. You might find that, oh, IT has this or tech in general has this kind of stigma of the type of person that goes into it. But if you really break down OT and IT, you're dealing with different people. Like an OT, like Elin, he's a consultant. He'll talk about how he'll write reports in his bed if he's not feeling up to it. Some people are fine being in that isolation mode, coming out when they need to. And it just really depends on what you want to be doing. OT might be getting you out of the office. You're not going to be in an office 5 days a week. You might be going out to sites. You might be getting your hands dirty. You might be getting in it, trying to understand and work with these environments that we're actively trying to protect. Whereas IT, you're kind of already there. For example, I worked help desk. It was a tiny little room. We kept it pretty dark. I didn't really go anywhere. If I need to remote in to help somebody install a printer, I could do that. But I had to be a little bit nicer, and I had to have my customer-friendly face on. Whereas in OT, there's a different understanding between everyone you'll be working with. So it kind of gives you an out. At least that's how I'll try and say it. There's a little dragon right there. Moving on. The barriers are your own creation, kind of. So there's this big stigma of people trying to move into OT and it maybe kind of being culty in a way, whereas you have these people, like I said, they're 50 years of experience in OT. That's kind of intimidating. You know, you're walking into this environment where you're going, hey, I learned about this sector maybe last week. Let me kind of hear about what you're doing, and then you explain what you've been doing in IT for the past 20 years, and that person did it for 30 years while also doing OT, or they utilize kind of what your daily knowledge is on a regular already. So instead of you going, oh, hey, what do you do at the bank? And then, oh, what do you do at, the mall or something? You both are going to talk about probably completely different things. You might have that common barrier in customer service, but your role and responsibilities if you're in the back stocking compared to customer facing are different. Whereas on the OT side, you're kind of okay, well, I'm already familiar with all of that and the OT side, and somebody in IT is only familiar with their IT side. They're not going to be able to break down to you the configurations or the understanding that some of these things have in a water facility, what the purpose is. They're not going to be able to relate what they're doing to that. Whereas the IT side has a full understanding of it. OT side has a full understanding of it, which can be at least a little bit of intimidating. And so that's why I want to say that the barriers are, in a sense, your own creation. People transition into OT daily. It's not like it's this exclusive club with memberships, and there's only 50 people allowed in every year. And when it comes to IT, you're 80% qualified. The other 20% is just changing everything you know at all. And again, that's also intimidating. Oops, also intimidating. But it's kind of just a gag. Regulations, your comfort zone, your mentality. A lot of people have an ego going into it. It's intimidating. But at the end of the day, you might just have to learn some new regulations. You just might be interacting with people who are doing something similar, but just on facilities that you would have never interacted with naturally in IT. But don't let that be intimidating. I mean, Bob, who's been doing it for 50 years, is going to retire soon, and he probably really wants to talk about what he's done for 50 years, especially since he hasn't moved from the company in a small town for all 50 of those years. So when you look and you're presented with this industry that seems so interconnected with the one that you've been working in, it can really be a turnoff to go, oh, well, I don't really know any of this, even though it seems so connected to what I've been doing. I feel like the one thing that I would like to emphasize is not to be afraid to ask questions. I feel like people, especially if they've been doing something for a long time, will give themselves a barrier by being afraid to ask questions or being afraid to be perceived in a certain way by peers, when in reality, that might be the barrier you're creating yourself is just your own mentality for it. So, breaking the stigma. My laptop turned off, so I can't read my notes, but that's fine. This kind of just turns into what I was saying. So this is a statement from ELIN, which is, I've spent hours in meetings discussing the meaning of all-in or on a requirement. So all these regulations that are being put in, all of these, everything, some of the people writing these regulations are never actually going to have to implement them themselves, and that's kind of the funny part. And so when we talk about breaking the stigma, everything that I just said applies, but in reality, there's also an aspect of reaffirming the stigma. You know, it is rough. There are going to be calls that you're just spending time trying to break down something that was written by someone who's never going to have to implement it. They have no idea if they're capable. I mean, we see that with the water sector right now. You know, water sector is trying to implement regulations that are similar to NERC-CIP, and water is already way under-resourced and funded than the electric environment. I mean, you'll run into some electric that is still obviously, but the ratio is not as severe as, at least when I see water environments. I mean, I manage a program where we give the platform from Dragos away for free to underrepresented water, electric, and natural gas, and water by far consistently has had less people on a team, less understanding of these environments, because they're all of a sudden getting thrown in and going, hey, OT exists now, make it work. So I have a lot of people that are IT that are like, hey, management told me that this is important now, and now I have to learn this whole new world, and that sucks. You know, who's gonna volunteer to do that? But you know, some people actually like it more, they find it more interesting. At least for me, when I was studying IT, I went, oh man, this cybersecurity stuff seems kind of boring, not what I expected. And then I learned about OT, and I went, oh my gobbly goodness, this is awesome. So it really depends. Sometimes you might be creating your own barriers, but you also, there's a reaffirming aspect of, hey, some of these aspects suck. I mean, you'd never be given the willingness of a patch Tuesday like IT gets. You know what I mean? And some of this equipment is older than me by 3 times, and it's never going to be changed. So what happens when it finally does kick the bucket? We're not even really starting to implement things that'll fix that cycle. We're just continuing that cycle with new hardware. So it's getting kind of frustrating. But at least for me, and at least for ELIN, my mentor who somehow got me my job, it's one of the most satisfying jobs we've ever had. I mean, I love what I get to do. I think it's super valuable. It's really rewarding getting to say that you're helping facilitate the security of these environments that are pretty important. And so with the pros and cons, it still has, at least in my heart, the pros outweigh them. When we talk about cyber threats, we share those too. I mean, ransomware, poor patching practices, a USB on the ground in a parking lot. I mean, those things can get in on both sides. I mean, we can share those. It shares the same technology. And that's another tie into the point of same but different. We share a lot of the same technology. It's just the way that the technology is utilized is different, which is something that I think is extremely important to understand and relate to. So when we talk about ransomware, ransomware might hit different than it will in an IT environment. If you have ransomware in an IT environment and, you know, let's say that they've encrypted your stuff, you're like, oh no, we can't email out, or everyone in the building just can't really reach out to the salespeople. I mean, when you're talking about that type of implication on the OT side, if you're having any downtime, if any of this equipment is getting messed with a little bit further in negative ways, it can, again, have that physical aspect. Now, is one better than the other? I would say no, because you can see ransomware and encryption practices on IT from the IT side in environments that are primarily enterprise that bankrupt companies. And I mean, that's people's livelihoods. That's, you know, a company. And depending on what that company does, I mean, in general, that sucks, but depending on what the company does, that extra sucks. So when you're considering OT and IT, both of these are very important. Poor patching practices, I mean, on the OT side, it's a little different because some stuff we just accept that we can't patch it and we build around that. However, if there is something you can patch and something bad happens, if you're IT or OT, somebody's going to be pissed at you. Like, either way, it's going to have pretty bad outcomes if something goes wrong. USB on the ground in the parking lot, I mean, we saw that with, I believe it was Stuxnet. That had a pretty big impact. And I mean, it wasn't necessarily on the ground in a parking lot, but the capability to have a little USB just go a long way. It's important. I know that Elin, as a consultant, has run into a lot of companies that like to say, oh, well, we're not IT, we're not a big company, they're not going after us with that. We're just a paper company. Nobody wants to go after us. But in reality, it doesn't really matter, because at some point, somebody just looks at you like a homework assignment. They're going to look at you like some type of just fun thing to see how far they can get before they actually go after a bigger dog. And so you have to realize that just because you don't think you fit into like the typical target for whether it's ransomware or having somebody try and put a nefarious USB in your environment, and in general, I mean, poor patching practices, that barrier is not, like, you are not exempt. Just because you're small or just because anything, you are literally not exempt. And honestly, they can double team you. So what I really thought was an interesting story was an attack by Blackjack in Russia. Now, I heard about this attack when I was at a SANS summit 2 years ago, the SANS ICS summit in Orlando, and the gentleman who explained this is a researcher for Clarity, and it was just an amazing talk. And basically, Russia did not want to confirm this, but I will say that theoretically this did take place in Russia. The information was provided by the attackers. However, Dragos did do a study on this, and what we found was that it didn't really seem like they were lying. Dragos analyzed the evidence provided by Blackjack and engaged with the persona directly. And based on our investigation, Dragos assesses with moderate confidence that the Moss collector that they claimed was compromised, but the extent of the damage was unable to be verified. So with that being said, this was IT and ICS malware. They named it FuxNet. And what it essentially did, and I'm going to have to go off my notes here because this was a last-minute talk from today, and I did this talk like 3 months ago. In April of 2024, the hacktivist persona Blackjack claimed they had successfully conducted a cyber attack against the Moss Collector, which is an organization responsible for the OT network overseeing Moscow's infrastructure sensor system. So the sensor gateway destructor attempts to destroy the gateway by removing critical files, stopping services, isolating the device from the internet, writing an incomplete amount of junk data to the UBI volume, leaving it in a corrupted state, wearing out locations of flash memory to the point of corruption, and a couple other things. And they were able to get to the sensor gateways because they still had default passwords assigned to it. That was like their bread and butter, was that it had default passwords assigned, which is another reason they stated that this would not have been confirmed at all by Russia, because it was kind of an attack on character. That was the main thing that it seemed to be, because this is a supposed Ukrainian actor, Ukrainian representative actor, not like from Ukraine, but they seem to be in support of Ukraine in this situation. So their goal was to hurt Russia's character, and Russia obviously wasn't going to admit that, so that's why this is alleged. They did claim to delete a bunch of mail files. Oopsies, hold on. So they did claim to delete all servers, mail, 30 terabytes of data, including backup drives, and most workstations. They did a factory reset of all routers and invalidation of all keys, disabling of SIM cards and SIM cards, and other actions. Now, let's see. In this actual PowerPoint, I do have the links to the documentation. But essentially, the way that they got in was from their IT environment, and then they were able to wiggle their way in to their OT environment. And so not only was it taking down the mail servers and deleting all this data from their IT side, the access that they had into the OT side allowed them to go in and proceed to action end-of-life sequences on all of the sensors. So I believe it was approximately 87 sensors across Moscow's infrastructure that got end-of-lifed, and therefore it was something that they had to physically go in and replace. This is another reason that obviously it was not necessarily confirmed by Russia. However, there's pretty good documentation provided by Blackjack on their conduction of this. But that's kind of what I mean when I say IT-OT. Like, that is something that came in on the IT side and then impacted both pretty severely. And so it's another reason why you should be friendly with your IT folks and you should be talking. Because if something's happening on that side, you should be informing your other half to make sure that they can be prepared for any type of suspicious type of activity and environment. And what we do see, unfortunately, is that there might be that suspicious activity on the IT environment or the OT environment, and they don't necessarily want to tell each other because they think it's just them. And so they want to keep their problems to themselves. And now your friends don't really know if they should be looking out for anything, which is unfortunate. So this comes to the, what do I do now? What are the next steps? Well, if you're on IT and you're kind of interested in OT, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to go up to that person who's been doing it for 50 years and go, hey, I really want to learn. I really want to expand my knowledge. I maybe want to pivot. That's something that I think I'm really interested in. What are my next steps? Like, what do I do? Like, what should I focus on? Focus on what you know. The biggest thing that you want to understand is, what's the business impacting systems you've worked on? Didn't go. There we go. Let's see. I skipped a slide of myself. 1 second. Yes, okay, so if we go back, this slide should be second to last. What do I do now? What are my next steps? I have a slide after this for us. We're going to skip that just temporarily. But in general, for example, if you're wanting to interview for an OT job, you want to know and you want to utilize what you know from your IT side. If you've worked with customer billing systems, database infrastructure, you were a system admin, you were utilizing skills that are transmissible to the OT side. You just got to know how to phrase it. You can't be like, oh, you know, I worked help desk, I did this. You have to think, okay, well, what's important on the OT side, and how can I equate those skills to each other? So for example, if you were really good at drinking water and now you want to work at a water company, you're not going to go, oh, well, I drink water on the daily. You're going to go, I utilize and interact with water every single day. My understanding is potentially limited in these areas, but my experience tells me that X, Y, Z this. So you don't want to just flat out go, oh, I did this and that. You want to research what you're trying to get into so that you can measure those skills up and explain them in a way that's a little more appealing. Basically the opposite of how I'm presenting right now. So when we go to reiterating reliability and uptime, this is where I say you kind of have to change your priority and change your way of thinking, because going from that IT side, you're really wanting to prioritize the confidentiality. But now you got to understand how important it is to make sure that you know everything is up and running. Availability is like number one for us, right? So this middle one is from Elin. He has sat through dozens of interviews that end, oh God, and displayed the importance of environments and uptime, but the IT folks just really want to fight that. And they're like, well, that's not how we did it on our side. That's not what you want to do. If you're wanting to make this pivot, you have to take a step back and understand the importance of both your environments, and now understand why this is more important to this side than it was to what you were doing prior. If you don't want to get out of the way that you were doing things, you go, oh, well, we did this on the IT side. Like, this is like, when I was working help desk, oh, this is how I did it. Why would I do it differently? It's like, okay, well, you're moving into a completely separate world, and you're trying to bring in the rules from a completely separate world. If you're going to keep that barrier up for yourself, where you're not able to transition and understand the perspective shift, this is where the barriers are your own creation. My most important factor that I at least think, and what I try and preach, is that you really need to put yourself out there. You know, when I entered this space and when I learned about it, I went to a conference, and basically the first thing out of my mouth in a much more professional way was that I have no idea what this is, and I really want to learn, because I don't know, and I want to know. And so obviously, it depends on the scenario, but that's basically what this picture was. So this is Elin. He's a consultant here at Dragos. This was me when I was doing my bachelor's in cybersecurity, a senior going, oh no, entry-level jobs in cybersecurity don't exist. What the heck do I do? And so I went to this conference, and I went to almost every booth, and since I was a student, nobody wanted to talk with me. They said, oh, that's cool, take our free stuff, bye. And I said, all right, fair, I'm here for free because I'm a student, so I get it. This gentleman spoke with me for like 40 minutes about what Dragos did, and what OT was, and what ICS was, and how it worked, and how pen testing looks different. And the explanation of those differences, I think, was very helpful in piquing my interest. But I wasn't like, oh, well, when I worked help desk, like that wouldn't make sense. Like what? It was, oh, that totally, like, you're explaining this environment is so different. Let me change my perspective. If I was doing this or if I was operating this, it does make sense that the priorities would be shifted a little bit. But my main point is that don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to look dumb. You're not looking dumb if you're trying to further your knowledge. In my opinion, somebody who is always able to find a question out of any conversation is trying to look at it from any side. And I think that's really good for development and making yourself teachable. And I think that's very valuable, is just make yourself teachable. If you're creating these fake barriers for yourself and you're not trying to get out of your own mindset, even to play devil's advocate for fun, you're creating those barriers. Like, this little red wall is basically what you would probably be trying to break into anything else if you just can't take a step back and think about it. Because at the end of the day, at least what I have in my notes, no, I'm kidding, it is technically true. At the end of the day, a slip up in OT could get someone killed, could get many people killed potentially. In a slip up in IT, you might not have something that severe. And it's not to say that one is better than the other, it's to say that you really need to be able to put yourself in that different perspective, or else you're just not going to fit in for it. And that's fine. If you want to stay on IT, that's fine. IT is very valuable. The goal is to understand that we are separate in certain ways, but we are together, but neither is better than the other. And that's something that I really like to preach, is that IT is very valuable and OT are very valuable, and they just have different impacts. And so when I say same, but different, I mean same, and different, all in collaboration and not in separation. So when it comes to leveraging what you can to maybe expand your knowledge, because there are some IT roles that having that OT background can benefit you, regardless of if you want to transition from IT or OT or vice versa. In general, it's really good to go over, for example, like the 5 critical controls from SANS. And I'm not just saying that because Rob is the CEO of Dragos and he would like find me if I didn't mention it. I'm kidding, probably. I'm not just saying it because I work at Dragos. Dragos OT Cert provides a lot of resources, like documents that will lay out and provide you injects to be able to execute tabletops. I believe incident response plans as well. Yeah, and so these are all things that are phenomenal, because if you're in an environment that's severely underfunded, whether you're an IT team that desperately needs an OT person and you can't convince your manager to hire one, or you're somebody in IT that's trying to understand how you can help and better collaborate with those teams, there are available resources out there. And they're free. Yes, I love free things. I love spending Dragos' money. Not only that, I just like telling people about things that they can use to potentially expand their knowledge. Like just looking over the SANS 5 critical controls can help you understand what these environments look like, what people who work in that sector maybe think like compared to what you might be thinking on the IT side. And I think in general, whether you don't want to expand or not, just so that you can learn more, even if you've been doing the same thing for like 10 years, learning some of these outside things might advance your perspective on the same thing you've been doing for years. And I think in a positive way. So for example, when I say Dragos OT Cert is a program that Dragos has. You get free resources. You get access to tabletops. You get access to IR plans. You get access to documents that'll help you do asset inventory. These are things that if you're a small team and you're trying to expand your knowledge, you can use with your team to save you guys time and to help you build up, even if you're not receiving that extra funding or extra support from like management. And sometimes it's not in the budget. I get it. There are YouTube channels out there. I know Mike Holcomb is really big in the OT industry. He came over from IT. He's very, very cool. And he has a whole series on YouTube of like IT and OT, how to move from IT to OT. And it goes over a lot of things that he went through as someone who actually worked in IT for a long time, much more experience than myself, and what he does now working in OT, and what skills he found most transmissible, what he felt like he had to learn really quick because there were those big gaps there, etc. Like very, very kind dude, 1, but 2, I feel like those videos are very helpful. I share those with a lot of people when I hear them say that they're like starting to interact with OT more even in their IT role and they don't know where to start. I like putting them there because YouTube videos are a little bit easier to ease yourself into compared to like a white paper that's just literally a bunch of white papers with thousands of words on them. That might be an exaggeration, but it's still intimidating, especially if you're seeing a lot of words that you don't know. So I think all of these in general are good. They're online webinars, which, I mean, you can join, and then they might be sales pitches, which is fine. But when you talk about just resources out there, there's places you can start. And generally, I have all these up here, but what I recommend probably the most is starting with YouTube channels. You'll find a lot of down-to-earth people who are probably in the same situation that you are. If you're trying to learn more about the other side of the house, if you're trying to combine your knowledge that you already have to better your role, or if you're just trying to find information to better support your team because that's like all you can do right now because you have to wait for another fiscal year until you can maybe send them to trainings or anything. This is definitely what I recommend. In general, it comes down to IT meets OT, big machines, bigger problems, but at the end of the day, they're both very valuable and they both involve collaboration, and I think it is important for both sides of the house to work together and to understand that their differences are not negative and do not hold negative connotation. They hold meaning in regards to just because you're different doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you go about things separately. It's still important to work together, which is what I think is the most important point that I want to get across today. So thank you for joining. I apologize that nobody was here. I also apologize that these are OT SetCon because I wasn't asked until a couple hours ago to present. So this is a presentation I did with somebody else who picked up a lot of the slack, by the way, so this was very intimidating for me. My role at Dragos is basically to give away our platform for free to water, electric, and oil and natural gas providers. And so I get to work with a lot of under-resourced utilities. So a lot of my knowledge is coming from them. So I understand and I see the disconnect. And so my feedback comes from where I see them do really good things in collaboration, but where I see a very heavy disconnect. One story that I will share, because I think I have time, is that we had a company that has to be NERC-CIP compliant. And we wanted to give them cloud for free as a part of like a mutual testing thing. And we did the talk with their OT gentleman, and he was all for it. And once it got up and running, a couple weeks later, he came to me and he went, hey, one of our guys is kind of upset with me. He's saying we're no longer in compliance. And we did a pre-interview. We said, hey, like we want to do this. Like, would it conflict with your environment at all? Because in this program specifically, because we cater to small people, you will almost never see somebody who has to be NERC-CIP compliant. And we go, hey, we asked, like, do you have any compliances? You were like, no, like we're good. Like, what do you mean? I was like, do you have to be NERC-CIP compliant or something? And he said, yes. And I went, okay, well, cloud isn't really going to work for you. We can't do that. We have to stop that immediately, actually. And the reason that they're even in this program is because there's backstory, but like they were one of the pre-testers, so they get in it no matter what. They technically wouldn't qualify now, so they have a pretty big team. And when we got all of their team members on to have a more formal conversation about like, hey, like how can we best make this work for your team and get you guys still utilizing this so you have platform and some type of visibility in your environment, like 15 people were on that call. The average participant in CDP might have 2 or 3 people on their team that I will work with. And it'll be one person who even does anything with this. And the other 2 people maybe are like their IT person, and like maybe we have some people that have a dedicated SCADA person, but that's still super rare. And so that conversation would have been very valuable to have with the team beforehand, and they were given optimal opportunity. Now, whether it just didn't come to mind or they maybe thought, hey, this doesn't matter to the IT side. This doesn't matter to the rest of my team. Why would I mention it? It kind of pulls the talk together in, well, you should be collaborating with your team. You should be able to think in the perspective of your team members. And you should be able to think in the perspective of the other side of the house of like, what regulations do we share that I might be making us now as a whole no longer compliant for with this one decision? And so that is just a little fun story that I wanted to add because I did not take a lot of time. So thank you so much.